You know the pattern. Someone you care about makes the same mistake again. They lose money on a bad investment, then make another, just like it. They return to a relationship that hurt them before. And you wonder, why can't they see what's so obvious? Why do they keep walking into the same wall? Today, neuroscience offers an answer that might change how you think about this. It turns out the brain doesn't process environmental signals the same way in everyone. And for some people, certain cues can hijack their decision-making in ways they never consciously recognize. In December of last year, researchers at the University of Bologna published findings that may explain one of psychology's most stubborn puzzles: why intelligent, aware people repeat behaviors that hurt them. The answer isn't about willpower. It isn't about intelligence. It's about how differently individual brains respond to the everyday sights and sounds that guide our choices. Using eye-tracking technology, pupil measurements, and computational modeling, the researchers mapped exactly what happens in the brain when environmental cues start leading us astray. What they found suggests that millions of people are walking through life responding to signals their conscious mind has long dismissed as unreliable, and they can't stop. To understand this research, we need to start with something psychologists have known for over a century: Pavlovian conditioning. You probably know the basics. Ring a bell before feeding a dog, and eventually the bell alone makes the dog salivate. But here's what's less intuitive. The same mechanism operates constantly in humans, shaping our decisions in ways we rarely notice. Environmental cues predict outcomes, and our brains learn those patterns automatically. The smell of coffee might signal that it's time to focus. A certain notification sound might make your heart rate spike with anticipation. A particular street corner might trigger anxiety you can't explain. These associations form without our permission, and for most people, they update when circumstances change. When the bell stops predicting food, most brains eventually stop responding to it. But what if some brains don't update? What if certain people keep responding to cues that once predicted something rewarding, even when those cues now lead to harm? This is exactly what the Bologna researchers investigated. They wanted to understand why some individuals continue making decisions guided by environmental signals that their own experience should have discredited. The research team found that some people show significantly stronger sensitivity to environmental cues than others, combined with a reduced ability to revise what they've learned about those cues. This combination explains persistent poor decision-making. The study used eye tracking and pupillometry, measuring how the pupils dilate in response to stimuli. These physiological responses reveal what the brain finds significant, even when the conscious mind claims indifference. What they discovered was striking. Individuals who were visually drawn toward reward-predicting cues, watching them more closely, pupils dilating more strongly, were the same individuals who updated their beliefs about those cues most slowly. In other words, the very mechanism that made them notice rewards also prevented them from recognizing when those rewards became unreliable. Attention and learning were working against each other. The researchers call this phenomenon sign tracking, a term borrowed from animal research. Sign trackers focus intensely on cues that predict rewards, sometimes approaching the cue itself rather than the actual reward. In animal studies, some rats will obsessively interact with a lever that predicts food rather than going directly to get the food. The signal becomes as important as the thing it signals. The Bologna study shows the same pattern exists on a spectrum in humans. Some people are goal trackers, they stay focused on outcomes. Others are sign trackers, they become captivated by cues. And here's where it connects to real-world harm. The patterns observed in the study mirror behaviors frequently seen among people with addictions, where cues continue to drive behavior despite devastating consequences. Someone recovering from alcohol addiction doesn't crave alcohol in a vacuum. They crave it when they see the bar they used to frequent, smell certain drinks, or hear music from a particular era of their life. The cues themselves become powerful triggers, and for sign trackers, these triggers maintain their power long after the person has consciously decided to change their behavior. Environmental sights and sounds quietly shape the choices people make, often without them realizing it, the researchers noted. And some individuals become especially influenced by these cues. This isn't a moral failing. It's a feature of how human learning works, a feature that becomes a vulnerability when circumstances change but the brain doesn't catch up. When familiar cues start to signal riskier or less favorable outcomes, highly cue-sensitive individuals struggle to adjust. They have difficulty unlearning old associations. The problem arises when cues start leading to worse outcomes for certain people. The brain struggles to update these learned signals, causing them to repeat risky decisions over time. This finding has profound implications for treatment. If someone's brain is wired to overattend to environmental cues, willpower-based interventions may be fighting an uphill neurological battle. Traditional approaches often assume that knowing something is harmful should be enough to stop doing it. But the Bologna research suggests that for sign trackers, knowledge and behavior can remain stubbornly disconnected. The researchers also found individual variation in how attention systems interact with belief updating systems. These aren't fixed categories. Sign tracking exists on a continuum, and context matters. Someone might be a goal tracker in most areas of life but become cue-sensitive in specific domains, perhaps around food or gambling or romantic relationships. This domain specificity might explain why someone can exercise remarkable discipline in their career while struggling repeatedly with the same personal pitfall. What does this look like in everyday life? Consider the person who keeps investing in risky ventures despite repeated losses. Each new opportunity triggers the same excitement that earlier ones did. The environment around the opportunity, the pitch meeting, the confident presenter, the glossy prospectus triggers learned associations with reward. And for sign trackers, those associations override accumulated evidence. Or consider someone who returns to a harmful relationship. Friends and family are baffled. They can see the pattern so clearly, but the person experiencing it responds to a different set of signals. The familiar voice, the specific way they apologize, particular places they shared these cues activate reward predictions formed during better times. The brain hasn't updated, even though the mind knows better. The implications extend beyond addiction and relationships. Anxiety disorders often involve heightened cue sensitivity. The brain treats neutral stimuli as threats, based on associations that should have faded but didn't. Compulsive behaviors show similar patterns. Rituals persist because the cues that trigger them maintain their psychological power, even when the person recognizes the behavior as irrational. This research doesn't provide easy answers, but it reframes the question from "why won't they just stop?" to "what is their brain responding to that mine isn't?" That reframe matters. It moves us from judgment to curiosity and from frustration to the kind of understanding that might actually help. So what do we do with this information? The researchers point toward practical applications. First, recognize that environmental cues may be driving automatic decisions more than you realize. Notice what happens just before you make a decision you later regret. What did you see? What did you hear? Where were you? The trigger often isn't the decision itself. It's what preceded it. When you're trying to break a pattern, consider changing your environment rather than relying solely on willpower. The Bologna research suggests this might be essential, not optional. If a certain route home takes you past a place that triggers harmful behavior, take a different route. If certain apps on your phone activate problematic patterns, remove them. This isn't about avoiding temptation through sheer force of will. It's about recognizing that some brains need environmental support that others don't, and that's okay. If you notice yourself drawn to certain cues before making decisions, pause. Consciously evaluate whether the outcome those cues once predicted still applies to your current situation. Ask yourself, am I responding to what's actually happening now, or to what used to happen? That question alone can create valuable distance between cue and response. Understanding this mechanism can also reduce self-blame. If you've been hard on yourself for repeatedly making the same mistake, consider that your brain may be processing information differently, not deficiently. There's a difference between being reckless and being cue-sensitive. The second isn't a character flaw, it's a cognitive profile that requires different strategies. For those trying to help someone who seems stuck in a loop, This research suggests that lectures about consequences may be less effective than helping modify the environment itself. Instead of asking, "Why do you keep doing this?" you might ask, "What triggers this, and how can we change what you encounter before the moment of decision?" If this kind of psychology interests you, consider subscribing. We explore research like this every week, looking at why humans do the surprising things we do. The Bologna team's work connects to broader conversations in psychology about individual differences in learning and attention. Not everyone's brain acquires and discards associations at the same rate. And this variability isn't random. It correlates with measurable physiological responses, pupil dilation, eye movement patterns, skin conductance that researchers can now track with precision. We're moving toward a psychology that treats individual differences as data rather than moral categories. Some people need different support systems, not because they're weak, but because they're wired differently. That shift in framing from moral failing to neurological variation doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does open new pathways for addressing it. The next time you watch someone make a decision you can't understand or catch yourself making one, consider what this research reveals. Our brains are constantly learning associations from the environment. Most of the time, this serves us well. But when circumstances change, some brains struggle to catch up. The cues that once led somewhere good can become traps. And escaping those traps might require changing not just what we think, but what we see, hear, and encounter before we even begin to think. That's not weakness. That's working with how the brain actually works. And sometimes, understanding is the first step toward genuine change.